Welcome to EDO Breakthrough, the podcast where we tackle economic development challenges head on. From small towns to bustling cities, every place has its own hurdles to overcome. The EDO Breakthrough podcast creates an environment of collaboration, innovation, and understanding where we can share our real-life challenges and brainstorm solutions. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, a certified economic developer and founder of PPR Strategies. Each week, we'll be welcoming a different, brilliant, place-based mind to talk through real-life economic development challenges that have been shared with us by you, our gracious listeners. Today, I am joined by Chris Knight, who is the Managing Director for FT Locations. Chris, before we get started, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Knight. I'm, as Sandy said, Managing Director at FT Locations, FT Financial Times. So we're one of the divisions within the large organization.
And so tell us, what is FT Locations and why are we talking today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of the people on this call won't know. So FT Locations is still a relatively new brand name. We only launched in November 2024. So, we're talking 7-8 months. But we come from a long background of working in economic development. So we were built through natural ways and acquisitions. So we began with a publication, which many of the folks might know, FDI Magazine. We then added on databases. So we become FDI Markets, FDI Benchmark. Then in 2018, we acquired a company out of California called GIS Planning. Many will know the product Zoom Prospector. And then in March 2023, there was an acquisition of the products and services of another economic development consultancy called WavTech. So obviously this was confusing, having all these different brand names. So the job we had since 2023 was bringing teams together and then bringing it together to build a new brand. So we're not going out there confusing the market. So while you might not have heard of FT Locations, a number of you will actually be working with us in some ways. So it's good. This joins all the dots.
That's awesome. Yeah, we went through a rebrand about 2 years ago and oh my golly, on our smaller scale, I can only imagine what it's really, like with all of these different very solid brands, like you said, like, GIS Planning and Zoom Prospector. And that is interesting, but I love the collaboration within this kind of family of companies to support the economic development environment.
Exactly. And we, as you say, it's not easy. We toyed with what type of name do we go? Do we want to use the Financial Times brand? Do we not? The pros and cons of that. The pros are the brand name. The cons are, things are a little slower because you have to go through the right protocols. But then it was really finding a word that can match everything we do. And at the end of the day, 80-90% of who we work with are locations, whether they're cities, countries, states, or they're companies who are considering which locations to set up in. And that's why we ended up coming up with just FT Locations and keeping it nice and broad.
Yeah, we used to be Platinum PR because it sounded fun 23 years ago when we started, but then kept getting looped into like, oh, you only do PR work in however people defined it. But it was so much more than that. And so we rebranded to PPR Strategies, which stands for People and Places Reimagined.
It's nice when it's broader. It allows you to do more things, right? And that's the goal. It allows you to evolve and not be pigeonholed. So all of our companies, whether it was FDI Intelligence, made us sound like we only work in foreign direct investment when we do more than that, or GIS Planning makes it sound like we only work within mapping. So again, like you, we had to look for something broader to allow us to evolve over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I love some of the
the products that you have, certainly. And I think Zoom Prospector, through my lens, is probably the most well-known product that you have. And but when you are working with or talking with an economic development organization, how do you want to work with them? Like, how are you kind of approaching them to help solve some of their challenges that your products or your consultancy might be able to support?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, right? It's going to see how we can solve problems rather than us saying you need this solution. It's finding out what the problem is and then finding the right solution. One of the good things, but also difficult things we have is we've got 16 solutions, and no one wants you to go out with a menu, right? So you need to change your approach and kind of understand where the pain points are. And that will depend. We're talking on this call a lot about economic development and Zoom Prospector, absolutely our best known tool if you're in the United States. But we've got the flip side. So we work now across the world. We work with about 1,000 or 1,100 economic development organizations globally. So around the world, our leading product's actually different. It's FDI markets. So we're very often having to understand the market, what the need is. And it has been, when you bring the teams together, that has been something we've changed, rather than going out and selling a product. It's going out and understanding if we can assist in any way. And then if we can, explaining how we can assist. And that can evolve any way. It can go from, you need mapping technology. That's not just nowadays saying you need Zoom Prospector. For some of our other clients, we have got another mapping technology where they just want to show, let's say, the FDI they've had over the years in real time. So we're looking now more at mapping. Now we've another division which looks more at marketing. Are you looking to create videos, to create podcasts, to create infographics, to create value propositions? Our team at the Financial Times can help there. We then have a business development. So is your goal to get new leads? Well, we've an events team that does that. If you need data, we've a data and analysis, which would be our FDI benchmark, which tracks FDI markets, which tracks our FDI benchmark, which then benchmarks the locations. Then we've an incentives product to tell companies what type of incentive they can get. So it's really difficult to go out and say all of this. So what I've always done in my career was try to be the guy that's known for FDI. And if you're known for FDI, when someone has an international problem, they'll try and pick your brain. And then that's how we begin the rapport. We start talking to each other. Is there any way we can help each other out? And, you'll know as well as everyone that particularly in economic development in Europe, we call it IPAs, investment promotion agencies. It's a relationship game. It's not like selling a used car or getting a quick buck. It is about building a relationship, because if you don't deliver well, then you break that relationship. And because it is such a small industry, that word of mouth builds quite fast. So I think that's a big change. It's becoming consultants is what the goal has always been. And it's how I've been trained and how I like our team to be.
I had a call this morning with a pretty long-term client. We've worked with them for 10 or 12 years. I've always considered them family. They are our family. I feel like I'm a part of their family, and we're here to help them figure out. And our role would be to help to connect them to you, because they might not know how to get to you, or that you could be a solution, or GIS, mapping, or Zoom Prospect, or any of these other things. And so it is just an interesting role that we are all able to play, that does come down to those relationships. And that's what makes me smile. And the work that we get to do is when we have some really lovely, mutually supportive relationships.
And it's what you said, a big part of our role is to be connectors. We can't always be the solution provider, but we can connect you to the right person to speak to. So, if an economic developer is like, oh, I've been trying to reach the right person in the Financial Times, well, I can be that connector And that's building the relationship. Or like one of my clients slash friends in Canada, he uses me as a connector of anything in London. If he's thinking of hosting an event, could you check out this venue, or do you know anything about this venue? And that's just the smaller support, which I think this industry does more than others that I've seen, which I would say are maybe a little more transactional industries. I'd say the economic development world is not transactional. It's very relationship build.
Yeah, it is fun because truly, I mean, the reason that we got here today was because Nathan from IEDC connected, and you took time to talk with me a few months ago when, I was able to say, my partner and I have purchased a home in Bath, England, and it was lovely. And so you helping me to figure out how things are done there. And again, to start to feel that sense of community and support. Because I am curious. So I love it, and the translation and kind of how different countries and different cities work in this space.
Exactly, and that's what will work with you. Your lingo will become European by the end of our conversation, just like mine's starting to become more American. So, yeah, that's where we end up getting, just picking up some words each of us would use.
I have to pause to say Bath, England, instead of Bath. So I do work on it.
being from Northern Ireland, I say Bath too. So I say it more like you, I think, than the English.
It's so good. It's so good. But I am curious. I'd love to. I don't know if you've got an example of somebody that you kind of worked with and support throughout. A lot, not all, but many of the organizations that we work with could be a small one or two person economic development office. Do your solutions, I don't want them to feel intimidating. I want them to feel approachable. And so, if you could talk a little bit about how your products, your solutions help to make a small team more effective, more efficient, get outside of their comfort zone to see real impact. What does that look like?
I think everything would be by the community and what's important to them, right? I'm not here telling that every community needs to do FDI, because you're in a very fortunate position in the United States that there's more domestic investment than there is foreign investment. So you could just go to California or Texas rather than going to London or Paris. So it would be firstly finding out the appetite of FDI, but sometimes our solutions are right, sometimes they are wrong. But for instance, if you're a one person operation, usually the number one most important thing you need is your literature, your website, your marketing content. So where our Zoom Prospector map helps is it makes your website sticky, and if it's a website sticky, you tend to get more leads. But what else do you need? If you go to a show, you need to have some of those glossy brochures we hand out. We help prepare all of that literature for you as well. So it all depends on what you've got. If you're a one person operation, the chances is you're doing it all. And I've helped not in the US so much, but I've helped in certain European cities in countries of Africa set up their economic development organization, from doing everything from writing their strategic plan to training all of their staff on how to do the different aspects of their role, to writing all of their marketing literature, to bringing in experts if we don't do it, to build websites, to create video content, to then do follow-up training, to then join client calls, to give them feedback on how they conducted those client calls, a bit of a hand-holding to supplying them with the right CRM for their needs, so testing other ones and then advising what they needed, to then giving them, if we can, any of our data solutions if that fits in what they need. So it really, I would say it depends on where you are in that cycle of setting up and where you want to be in 5 years. Because, some EDOs have aspirations of international, some do not. So we need to learn what those are. And usually where we begin is we also host training seminars where people can come along, find out more, I always say when you've long-term clients, it has to be a good fit both ways. It's very easy for clients to sack consultants. It's much more difficult the other way around. But for something to last a long time, you need to both want to work together and you're working as a team rather than a contractor. And that's what happens when you get in with the 1, 2, 3 people operations. You become a team member. And I think that's what you were alluding to with your client, where you built that over the years and that relationship has grown. And that's the best type. We then have got much more, if you're working with larger organizations who are maybe wanting to change their strategy. We had one client, an economic developer in Canada, that wanted to target life sciences, and they didn't know where to begin because it's quite a broad sector. So the first thing we did was we identified the 28 segments within it. We then worked out within those 28 segments, what are the top 3 that they have strengths in? Then we benchmarked them against competitors to say why them, built their materials. Then we did like a market prioritization study and say, look, if you want investment in this, you should be looking, let's say, at Ontario, at Massachusetts, and at the UK. And then the last phase was setting them up with, how you engage with UK companies, German companies, and which events to attend. So that's more advanced in what they're doing. But then we go all the way from the bottom to the top.
I love that. And yes, it is very much aligns with the type of work that we do at different levels and different scales. But sitting down and kind of developing that strategic plan with them and to help them to see the potential. Because sometimes you're so in the weeds every single day and you don't know what you really could be 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And what are some of those small steps that need to be made now, or big steps that, that you need to be making today, in order to get to, that end goal of bringing in a new big life science company or creating an incubator for some small life science startups, and how does that align, and thinking about, the environment, your entire ecosystem. Do you have the workforce development partners to support that? Can you, continue to add and fuel, or is this just somebody's latest little buzzword that they've heard that they want you to attract, or is there real substance to it? Could it truly be a strength? So interesting. And I think that a lot of over the years, I think a lot of our clients, large and small communities, have the larger ones obviously always kind of thinking FDI. Some of the smaller and medium ones are starting to think about it, but with, obviously lots of change and in the political landscape and, just the overall kind of global economy and what that looks like. But one of the things that I've been trying to do, and this is just a piece of that, is to make it not as intimidating, and to get people to think about not to put FDI in its own little silo off to the side, but it needs to be an integrated part of your entire investment attraction strategy, or retention, supporting those existing foreign-owned companies that might already be in your community. I'm curious what you're seeing, or advice that you give for those that, or those communities, those organizations that have the potential to support, but maybe aren't making it a priority. What could or should they be doing?
Well, I think, the first thing I would say is it's only within our industry, economic development, that we use really, or academic, that we use the term FDI. A company doesn't typically say, I'm going to do FDI. They say, I'm going to set up in the US. So I think we make more of a thing about the term FDI than companies. They just call it growth. So, what I would say is doing FDI for the sake of it, I don't think everyone needs to, but if your industries, for instance, if your key industry is looking at solar panel, there is a good chance that you should be thinking about what is happening in Spain and Germany. So then foreign investment does become important. But if your key industries are like software and IT services, well, that's going to be domestic. So I think we need to always begin with what are our goals? And then we work out backwards. A misconception I often hear is that FDI is expensive. I think that's the most common thing that I would hear. I would throw back and say attending and exhibiting at a local trade show is exponentially more expensive, but it comes out of a different budget. So, I think it's all in perspective. I think FDI can be huge. It can be never ending, but you can also do niche one-off small projects. Like, for instance, if you were doing I'm targeting solar panel manufacturing companies. You could do a quick study to work out where in the world we should focus. You could then start doing a little PR campaign in those 2 countries, let's say. You could do a little bit of digital marketing in those countries and then visit them. That is not as much as people think it would be. So, I don't think everyone should do FDI, but I don't think everyone should be scared of it. Secondly, I think we need to I say this and it's against what we do, but it's what people should be hearing is, we should work smarter and not keep spending money. What I find quite often happens is the state is paying to do a lot of FDI, but then the cities are also paying to do the same thing. Work together. It's an investment coming to the state benefits everybody. Go on those missions with your state and do it at a lower cost. Secondly, you touched on it, BRE, or as we call it in Europe, aftercare. It is much easier to sell a location to an existing investor than it is to find a new one. Like it's exponentially easier to do. If you're a location that is not as well known, well, you need to do the marketing. You need to show where you are on a map. You need to persuade them why. Whereas if a company's there, you're competing against other sites they have around the world to say you should grow. So people who say we don't do FDI, but if you do BRE to a foreign company, guess what? That's FDI. So again, not having that perception or that terminology of FDI, but put it into your BRE. Another low cost thing, which I've done many times for countries is, let's say you're a small community who's got one Spanish investor. I would do an analysis and work out their supply chain, because there's a good bet that they're importing some supplies. So let's try and bring their supply chain, because that will then lower their distribution costs or their import costs. So, you can think of FDI in different ways. And that's something which I often say. It doesn't always mean, setting up an office overseas or attending a big trade show. It can be much smaller. But, BRE, I would say, is more of a priority than doing FDI if you're getting started. Looking after what you've already got is the absolute number one thing you need to do. Look after your investors. They'll be your best testimonials. They're most likely to grow if you look after them right. But it's key that you've got a strategy. I often think that maybe people who are listening will agree, won't agree. I often think when we talk about BRE, we forget what it stands for. It means business retention and expansion. I often think that we think of BR and we're forgetting the E, right? We want to retain the companies who are there. So what that means in my head is we want to be problem solvers. When someone's got a problem, we want to help them. That's fantastic. But it's reactive. You always get, and I don't know about anyone listening or yourself, Sandy, but you also get those quietly dissatisfied people. People who maybe you're unhappy with your cable TV or your phone bill. You're not going to kick up, but you're just going to move elsewhere. So if you're not being proactive, how are you finding out about the quiet quitters? People who are maybe reevaluating being here because they haven't reached out with their problem. So, when I'm looking at it, I do think a lot of people need to rethink their BRE strategy to be more proactive. Because if we often, when I do it, I do a quadrant of where you want to be. You want to win the investment, you want to look after them. But what you ultimately want to do is embed them into your community. If you embed them in your community, let's say they're funding local university, they've got a talent program with local colleges, guess what? They are very unlikely to leave, and you have got a guaranteed testimonial. I'm glad you brought up BRE. I think that's probably the key thing I would be suggesting to anyone on the call.
I think those are great tips. And yeah, I love, again, kind of making it reasonable and getting people to think a little bit differently. And yes, I totally agree. I get to teach marketing and attraction and different things for IEDC and others, and always say that, before you start marketing and attraction, the first thing you have to do is have a solid BRE program in place, not just talky talk, but like actually doing it. I think when we did our prep call, did you tell me, or somebody did recently in a conversation I had, said that when they had an international prospect coming in, they would have a local business pick that prospect up at the airport.
Yep.
And have that conversation. Oh my gosh, what a great example of collaborating with your businesses that are there. I think your supply chain example of a solar company in your location, in your community, but has a supplier in Spain or something like that. If you're working, let's figure out how to strengthen those relationships. It will help your business owner because they'll want to pick up this other peer executive decision maker and have some of that quality, really candid quality time with them. But you also need to know what kind of story they're telling to make sure that they have you have a good relationship with them.
I think it also goes to the next level, right? You should also know your local companies, right? Because if you can replace a potential, that we call it import substitution, right? If you can substitute something you're importing for a local business, you're helping that company save money, but you're also offering a BRE service to a local business. Because I think sometimes when not, I think the US is better at it than Europe. But often when we look at aftercare BRE, it is for companies who have come in, new companies coming to the community, rather than looking after people who set up their company within the community and helping them grow and go to the next level and find new contracts.
Yeah. I'm curious. I know we've seen BRE change, I think, for the better since the pandemic. I'm curious how you're seeing FDI and just the general approach to relationships and identification of prospects and kind of being a little smarter than just throwing money at the problem and attending a trade show, checking the box and moving on. Have you seen changes in the last 5-6 years?
Yeah, massively. And it's crazy we still talk about the pandemic now. But,
I know.
when the pandemic hit, the truth was there was a lot of EDOs who didn't know the companies who were in their community. So the first thing was scrambling to get the data, because how can we tell them what we're doing, what's happening, if we don't know who they are? So I think that's changed. And, I would say there are a huge number of economic developers who were probably using a spreadsheet as their CRM prior to COVID. And then it's like, oh no, we need to start, how do we share a spreadsheet with everyone unless we get it onto sheets, and then we've data protection issues. A lot of people jump to CRM. I know that we've a CRM and we got more inquiries on that than ever. Then it was more people started questioning because as you said, they paid lip service and said they did BRE. And by saying they do that, that means they answered the phone if someone had a problem. But I think I started to see more teams be set up where people are dedicated to it, where there's actually targets on it. We came up at the time with an aftercare, we called it aftercare or BRE diagnostic, which we did give for free to many clients, which allowed them to answer questions about what they're doing. And then it told them the gaps that they had in their BRE strategy. Of course, we did it thinking then maybe we would be able to help them with that strategy. But the most important thing was making sure the end users, the clients, got looked after. And so that changed a lot. I think, we talk about it and laugh about it now about webinar fatigue. I know a lot of people have it, and we've never got back, in my opinion, to the normal working culture pre-COVID, where you didn't have endless time on Zoom or whatever. But I think what it has made people realize is you don't need to go to all these conferences. You need to look at a return on investment at what you do. I think that's something I've looked at in our team is stop flying all over the world, because often your clients are not going to a trade show to meet with you, the economic developer. Your clients are going to trade show to make money. So you're actually maybe not the most important meeting that they can have there. Go to your client and visit them in your local community. Don't visit them halfway around the world or halfway around the country. Sit in their office, find out how it's going, build a real relationship. That's what I'm seeing happening more. I also think a challenge we hadn't worked on so much with BRE during and after COVID is, quite often when we think of BRE, we think of that company in our community and think of speaking to them. We started looking at it differently and thinking you needed to do a bit of a three-pronged approach, because that entity is more of a lobbyist, right? They don't always make the final decisions. They'll lobby, and maybe they're lobbying the North American headquarters, which could be in New York, it could be in Toronto. So you should also speak to them, but also to the global HQ. So you should be building these relationships deep within the organization, not just on the local level. So I often say, for those who are going international, also meet the global HQ, because they might have, particularly if you look at big companies, your Toyotas, your Hyundais in Asia, there are so many different entities in that one company. You might find new projects, whereas locally, you'll get an expansion. So we did find that changed a little, and people started looking much broader when they're doing their BRE.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to give yourself the time and the space to dig deeper and to think about all of these things and opportunities. And relationship building takes time, and proving value and having offerings, and knowing that economic development is a very long game. It is not something that is a quick purchase, because it's big, and expansions, all of it all takes time.
You're absolutely right, and what you say is key. And we talk about, if you're moving into international, one of my big pieces of advice is to be patient. I've had people I've worked with in the past who have wanted to go, let's say, to Japan and kind of expect the companies to follow them back. Doesn't work like that. The average FDI deal from the first meeting can be 3 years, according to the World Bank. Particularly if you look at Asia. If you think of Japan, a common phrase we would use is, you got to sell your face before your product. So the idea is meeting one is to build a relationship. Meeting two is to break bread. Then you start going into business, but then you've got deep relationships. So, I think it is something that we need to always keep in mind, as you said, the length of time of these projects. You can't just go in 1 year and not back for another 4 years. You need to tie to that. I would encourage anyone, if you haven't seen the results in 1 year, don't change, because if you change, then you're back to square one again and again.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice also. What do you see, in terms of the future of FDI and kind of what that's looking like, or investment, what that's looking like, around the world? If you were to look into your crystal ball, what do you see?
I think I'd look short term and then longer term. I think with a lot of the uncertainty around tariffs and maybe confusion at how often that has changed, that I'm seeing a bit of a stalling. Companies who are ready to make the move are just holding off. That's not saying they're canceling. I don't believe that's happening. But my prediction is over the next 3 to 4 months that we'll have lower numbers, but come the end of the year, when there's more certainty, I think FDI is going to ramp up. If you think of the market, a lot of things that are happening is suggesting it's going to need to. I think the typical makeup of sectors and who invests where, that's going to change. If you think back to last year and the year before, roughly, don't quote me on the number, but roughly 25 to 30% of global FDI was in like green industries or renewable. I think with the new policies and the new rhetoric we see, I don't think the US will be pushing as much on that industry if the Inflation Reduction Act isn't there. So that makes me think that if the US isn't going to win as much of that industry, the overall industry will come down, but it will increase in Europe because we're doubling down on green. And I'm seeing by far, I think this year compared to the same period last year, we're talking about 400% growth in defense FDI, in military technologies, in drones, and it's this sad truth that no one wants to talk about, but it is an FDI opportunity. And I say that as that's the only ones we know about. With a number of non-disclosure agreements, that number could be even more. So I think that will grow. I think AI, it's the buzzword, but everything we see, it's growing more and more. But for that to grow, in turn, we're going to need data centers to grow. So that's going to go. Then, everything that anyone buys now, we're going to have more chips, more semiconductors. So like these industries, I think are staying with us. I think there will be a lot more Europe to Europe investment. Particularly in the defense industry, I think a lot will be in that. Within clean tech, I think a lot will be in that. But then I think the US are going to be hugely successful in large manufacturing projects. We've already seen a number that have been announced. So the makeup will be different, but I think overall, FDI will continue to grow. The only thing which could change is because with renewable, it depends. If you look at FDI, you can look at it in three ways: number of projects, the overall capital, or the jobs created. The overall capital will be interesting because we look at mega projects, which are projects over $1 billion. And there are so many of them last year within hydrogen. So whether they keep remaining having so many in green tech, I don't know. But data centers will all be $1 billion plus investments. It's just a matter of, can we find enough places to do data centers to maintain what we need for AI to keep growing? But yeah, my prediction is project numbers will stay really strong. Jobs will be going up because a lot will be within manufacturing, I believe. CapEx will depend on which of those sectors I bet on are going, and then the size of the projects. Again, CapEx is a tougher one. Not everyone tells how much they're investing. So some of that is guesstimates.
Sure. Yeah, that is generally not unfortunately a lead with it. But you're right. I get that. I could see the number of projects being down, but capital and overall capital investment and jobs, as something there. You did talk about AI, artificial intelligence, and oh my gosh, I couldn't believe we almost made it to the end of this podcast without that term coming up. But I'm curious how, kind of shifting slightly with it from what you were referring to, I'm curious how you are integrating it within FT locations. How are you guys embracing or utilizing artificial intelligence in your day-to-day practice?
So the Financial Times have been at the forefront of media within AI, right? So we've got our own deal with ChatGPT where we provided a lot of news articles up to 2022 working with them. We've got an AI council. And I say that and I'll break down how it means to FT locations. But that means that throughout the organization, we're to be experimenting with AI. But I think the biggest thing that I would say that we're of the belief and of AI plus human. Everything we do in FT locations, we believe in AI plus human. We never believe that AI is going to replace our team. We think it's going to hopefully change roles so people are doing more high value. Where we're using it so far, we're using it around news stories. So we're putting big data in to models, and it's pulling out some interesting FDI stories to use. We're experimenting it with our FDI markets tool, where we've created internally our own company profiler. So if, for instance, we type in a company name, we can auto-populate it with the most recent information on it. Again, saving our team the time of entering. But what they have to do is nothing goes into our system without them clicking approve. So we're using it in places like this, but we're also being cautious. What we want, and if you look at anyone who has access, look at the Financial Times, and they've created an Ask FT. Okay, because the belief is that we're moving away from going to search engines and searching for something. We just ask a question to AI and it should give us a response. So we've created Ask FT, and that will go through everything in the FT to answer it. We're testing how that can work with databases, rather than we're trying to think years down the line. If you think with a database, usually you create searches or filters. I want to look at this sector at this location. But really what you want to know is, has FDI been increasing in North Carolina or South Carolina, and what are the industries? I should just get that information, right? Or if I'm in some prospector, I should just be able to type, I'm thinking of setting up an operation. The most important things to me are X, Y, and Z. It should just be popping up and showing me. So to get to that level takes time. But then you've the other way to look at AI, and how are economic developers using it and how should they be using it? I think that's also a fascinating thing, because, I've been, I guess, outspoken in saying this quite often. Just due to bureaucracy, economic development, investment promotion typically is 3 to 5 years behind the private sector, in what they're able to do, because you have to go through government procurement. So we're finding very mixed levels of AI use. If you look at Estonia in Europe, you've got a full AI support as you speak to them. You can get value propositions built for your company without ever speaking to anyone. That's where they're going. You've got Costa Rica, who have got like an AI screening tool, which then scores like the likelihood of companies to invest based on if they've been on their website, if they do all of these things. So using it, I think Phoenix, Arizona are being really clever with use too. But then on the flip side, I speak to some national level agencies and they say, due to federal rules, we're not allowed to implement any AI in anything we do, but at city level, they're allowed to. So I think it'll be very interesting. I've been doing quite a few panel discussions and blogs about AI use in economic development and where we think that is going, because the big fear is, will AI be able to help a company set up without ever speaking to economic development? I fully disagree with that. Like I said to you, I think it's so much about relationships, but AI should be able to speed up the process. If people need data, if people need insight, they shouldn't be waiting for 2 weeks till we get a team to put that together. So I do see it's going to be very interesting over the next, it should be over the next 6 months to a year, but let's say over the next couple of years, of how fast we're able to adopt it into all aspects of our work.
I love this, culture of experimentation that you have within the Financial Times and the entire corporate. That's what I was hearing, and kind of experimenting with technology, with AI, with all of these things. But then, yes, definitely that human element coming into play is so critical. I do try to, encourage my team to experiment with it, to not be afraid of it, but to know that it, like you said, like your example of the of your list, and still having to click a button before it goes into your CRM or before something gets added. There has to be that human touch. Is some good checks and balances. Let's work efficiently, but not be crazy stupid.
Yeah, especially with all the hallucinations we're still getting.
Oh my gosh. So, cool. Well, as we, kind of come to a pause here, I would love to see if there's anything that you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to, any questions that I didn't ask that you were like, oh my gosh, I wish that Sandy would ask me about this thing.
No, I think my main one is, to anyone who's thinking of international is, the opportunities are there. My huge advice is it's very important to focus on your niche. You can't be everything to everyone. A lot of folks, claim that they're solid in all sectors, that they can attract any FDI. You can't. It's an interesting fact. There's around 15,000 FDI projects a year, and there's close to 15,000 EDOs competing for them, right? So we got to be different. We need to know our niches and go out with that message, start small, and the opportunities, I think, are there.
Yes, and we definitely, our team, we love helping organizations, communities to tell that story, to figure out what where their strengths lie, and how to clearly articulate who it is that they are, so that people that they are not trying to attract, can go elsewhere, and they can really focus their energies on what is a good fit.
I think the work that particularly the PR aspect of what you do, I think is very important. Like a lot of EDOs, their first thing when they think of international is to hire a lead generation consultant. Now, I ran a lead generation company for many years. It is much more difficult to get a meeting with a company if the company doesn't know where your location is. So I think it's very important to begin with a bit of a PR exercise. Like, it's a little bit like warming up the market before you dip your feet in it, warming up the water, whatever we say. But I think it would, having, whether it's a few pieces out in local media or whether it's a digital strategy targeting it. But I think it is definitely, so I would be looking at that after you've got your messaging right, is testing the messaging on the market before spending all that money to go out to the market to meet with companies. Because what you don't want is the first 20 minutes to be discussing where you are. And in my opinion, you never want to start a meeting with, say, I'm 2 hours away from so-and-so, because that's often what we hear. I'm 2 hours outside Houston. Okay, so why don't I go to Houston? So, I think it's important to get the message out so the companies know about you before you get into that meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And it's interesting that you talk about earned media. We always talk about owned media first. Like, let's, make sure that your blog, that your website, that, all of your materials tell it, and then we'll get those third-party earned media, third-party media, whether it's a magazine, a newspaper, or a podcast, whatever, then them telling your story, so that you're right. When you show up in the meeting, you're not having to tell somebody. That is a great example of, I'm 2 hours from such and such. Okay, cool. Thanks. Yay. Yay. Or having to show it on a map, like, oh my gosh.
The back of your business card. You see that a lot, right? Where you've got the map. I do think it's not a bad idea having the map on the back of your business card, but I wouldn't want to bring it out in my initial conversation to show it.
Yeah. Hopefully somebody has, already Googled me and knew that that's where I was from or whatever. But anyway. So the final question that we ask all of our guests on the podcast is, what was your economic development breakthrough?
Honestly, it was out of uni. If I'm really open about it, I was offered 2 jobs. One was for a Big Four consultancy to do pure consulting, and the other was for an economic development consultancy. But the smaller company said I would get to travel, and that was my hobby. So on day one, I went to Brussels for a week of working, and then I was like, actually, I really enjoy the work as well. But originally, I didn't. Like most people, I imagine, who listen, outside of the US, we don't have economic development at university, right? Most people tend to fall into the industry some way. It's not a bad thing that happens, but like, I did economics and finance. So I got a job doing economic modeling, but it was for a government client in Ireland. And I really liked the idea because I believe that, FDI and tourism are very much aligned. And because, people tend to like invest in places they like going. And it led me, because I enjoy traveling, and that led me into liking more about FDI and the story about selling a location. And then I'm from Northern Ireland, and, as we went through all the troubles in the past. And it was really interesting watching how they turned the story around and they changed that narrative to become like one of the most famous places for software investment in Europe. And I was like, well, all communities should be able to work on doing things like that. So yeah, I fell into it, but then stayed with it because once I found out what I was doing, I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. I love it. Thank you so much, Chris. We could continue, but I want to respect your time and that of our listeners. And I thank you for being here and joining me today. And I thank our listeners for sticking with us. I hope you got some great ideas and tips and encouragement out of this conversation. We'll have lots of details and connections to connect with Chris and FT locations in the show notes. So please check that out. And if you've got a minute, I'd love it if you could leave a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. Until next time, thank you so much for listening.
The EDO Breakthrough Podcast is brought to you by PPR Strategies. PPR Strategies, standing for People and Places Reimagined, is a strategic consulting firm working specifically with EDOs and other place-based organizations. We share the unique stories of communities through communication, strategic planning, marketing, media relations, and more. Visit us at pprstrategies.com and find our contact information in the show notes. I'd like to give a big thank you to you for listening. Remember, together we are unstoppable.